7. This Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High.
Alright, so now we're going to talk about some details of Melchizedek. He lived in the days of Abraham, and it says he was priest and king. King of Salem and priest of God. Now that's an unusual combination, because priests in the Jewish world, priests would all have to come from the tribe of Levi, and I think kings would have to come from the tribe of Judah. So you couldn't have a priest and a king because they came from different tribes. But Melchizedek wasn't a Jew because he lived in the same time as Abraham. I think he was a regular person. I don't think he was magical or mystical. I mean, there are some mystical things about him, but I think he was an average person. He was just someone that we really don't know enough about.
He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him, and Abraham gave him 1/10 of everything.
All right, so now that is amazing, why Abraham would give Melchizedek 1/10 of everything. I mean, I don't know what their Abraham and Melchizedek's relationship was before this instance, when Abraham met him returning from the defeat of the kings. And it says that, well, let's see, because this is important. Who blessed who? I think Melchizedek blesses Abraham, and Abraham gives Melchizedek 1/10 of everything. So he pays him 1/10 of everything. This may be the origin of the tithe and the Mosaic Law. I haven't studied that recently, but it would be, I guess, worth a look. You know, why did God decide to ask the Jews to give 1/10 of what they have? Was it because Abraham gave 1/10 to Melchizedek, or some other reason? I don't know.
First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also, king of Salem means king of peace.
All right, and so names actually mean something. You know, one of the most fascinating things that I've found out recently, within the past couple years, is if you stack up the names, I believe it's the first 10 generations between Adam and Noah. It's a message from God. So you can just go to YouTube and type in like the first 10 generations, the secret code or the names, secret code of the names of the first 10 generations, or something like that. I think there's a hidden message from God to man in the naming of the generations of people. And it probably goes even beyond that. You know, all throughout the Bible, it talks about this person's name means this or that. You know, Jacob's name means supplanter, I think, because he was a deceiver. I think he stuck his hand out when he was being born, but then pulled it back in. So they thought he was going to be the firstborn, but then it turned out he really wasn't. Esau was born first. And so that's why they named him Jacob, because he tricked them. And that's what his name means, trickery. And in the end, Jacob tricked his brother into selling his birthright for a bowl of soup. So it the name actually is applicable to the character of the person. And so here we have Melchizedek's name, meaning king of righteousness, and king of Salem, which means he was a righteous person, and he was probably a literal king of the place called Salem, and I'm not sure where that is. I think I've looked it up before, and it's a little uncertain where that is. And king of peace, so he was a peaceful man.
without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever.
Now here's the part that makes it sound like he's not a normal man. And I'm not absolutely certain, but I'm just assuming that he is a normal man, but maybe he had no record of father or mother or genealogy. I mean, the Jews are the ones who kept a close eye on their genealogy and where they came from and what their history was, because they had to prove what tribe they were from in order to do different kinds of things in their life, whether they were going to be a priest or a king or whatever. Now, when he says he has no beginning of days, that sounds like he was never born. He was eternal and has no end of life. Sounds like he's eternal. But that also could just be a figure of speech. And that's kind of what I think. I don't know. I will certainly entertain your thoughts on that as well. And he remains a priest forever. That's a little complicated too. I don't know how to explain that. Now, maybe his legacy as priest lasts forever. He's certainly not a high priest of the Jews because he wasn't even a Jew. Jesus is our high priest for the spiritual Israel, which is not just literal physical Israel or the Jews, but all those who believe and have faith and are by faith are sons of Abraham. But I would, I guess, lean toward Melchizedek's legacy lasts forever because of this meeting and blessing between Abraham and Melchizedek.
Just think how great he was. Even the patriarch Abraham gave him a tenth of the plunder. Now the law requires the descendants of Levi, who become priests, to collect a tenth from the people, that is, from their fellow Israelites, even though they also are descended from Abraham. This man, however, did not trace his descent from Levi, yet he collected a tenth from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. And without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. In the one case, the tenth is collected by people who die, but in the other case, by him who is declared to be living.
All right, so that's another thing that makes it sound like Melchizedek is not a normal person. That, you know, because it says the priest collect a tenth from the people, but those priests die. It says Melchizedek collected a tenth from Abraham, and he doesn't die, or he is declared to be living. So, and he's supposed to be a type or shadow of Jesus. It's not Jesus himself. It's a kind of Jesus, or a kind of or representative, something to point forward to Jesus. So he could have been an angel, or he could have been just a notable person whose legacy lasted forever.
One might even say that Levi, who collects the tenth, paid the tenth through Abraham, because when Melchizedek met Abraham, Levi was still in the body of his ancestor. If perfection...
And so I didn't make a comment. On verse 7 it says, and without doubt the lesser is blessed by the greater. So when you're talking to Jews, as the author is talking to Jews in the book of Hebrews, Abraham is the father of the Jews. He's the greatest of them all. But it says, without doubt, the lesser is blessed by the greater. So it's saying Melchizedek is greater than Abraham. Even though you consider Abraham to be the greatest of all, Melchizedek was greater, because Melchizedek gave a blessing to Abraham. And you have to be greater than someone in order to give them a blessing.
And could have been attained through the Levitical priesthood, and indeed the law given to the people established that priesthood, why was there still need for another priest to come, one in the order of Melchizedek, not in the order of Aaron.
So the order of Aaron is the way that God appointed the Jews to establish priests and high priests. They had to follow the rules. They had to do what God told them to do in order to appoint priests and high priests according to the written law of Moses. They had to be also descendants of Aaron. Aaron was a Levite, but so not all Levites could be a high priest. You had to be a descendant of Aaron to be a high priest. You could just be a descendant of Levi to be a regular priest. But this says another priest was to come, not a high priest in accordance with Jewish appointments and genealogies, but a different kind of high priest, a high priest who is prophet, priest, and king. And only Melchizedek was priest and king. Therefore, Jesus, his priesthood would be in the order of Melchizedek, priest and king, not just a descendant of Aaron.
For when the priesthood is changed, the law must be changed also.
All right, so those people who want to claim that the Ten Commandments are just as applicable today as they ever were, either they think that the law has not changed, there has been no difference between the old Mosaic law and the new Christian age, or they just misunderstand. You can't get rid of part of it and not get rid of all of it. Now, parts of it are still applicable, not because they were never nailed to the cross, but because there were good things included in the old law that still continue in the new covenant, which is to love your neighbor primarily. And anything that's done with love as motivation is not a violation of law. So anything in the old covenant that was motivated by love, that would carry over. But it's not just a law written on tablets of stone, black and white, do this or don't do it and be punished. But since Jesus was not a descendant of Aaron, the priesthood had to change. And therefore, it's impossible for Jesus to be the high priest if the law of Moses is still applicable. Because you have to be a descendant of Aaron to be a priest under the law. And Jesus was a Jew, and he was under authority of the law. So, in order for Jesus to be high priest, the law had to change. The old law had to be done away with, and a new law had to be established. So, either Jesus is not high priest right now, or the old law has been nullified. And that's what I think is the case.
He of whom these things are said belonged to a different tribe, and no one from that tribe has ever served at the altar. For it is clear that our Lord descended from Judah, and in regard to that tribe, Moses said nothing about priests.
Now, this verse has came up many times in my life for, I guess, a different reason than I think it should, because some people claim, especially a lot of people in my circles and background, claim that unless God specifically says you can do something, then it's wrong to do it. And they would use this verse as justification and say, since, or in regard to that tribe or the tribe of Judah, Moses said nothing about priests. Well, because he didn't say you can't be from the tribe of Judah, I guess that doesn't mean anything. The fact that Moses did say you have to be from the tribe of Levi, that means by necessity you can't be from the tribe of Judah or Manasseh or Ephraim or any of the others. So you don't have to specifically say you can't do the others. You can just specify it has to be this way, and then that, by necessity, excludes the others. If he says it has to be done this way. So, you cannot use this verse to say that if God never says something specifically about one thing, such as, I don't know, let's say kitchens or church vans. That's one they would use. It says God never said anything about a church van, therefore it's wrong for you to for your church to have a church van or a church kitchen or cafeteria or something like that. God never said specifically that you could support an old folks home. So you can't do it. They say if it doesn't say you can do it, you can't do it. Well, what really matters is what God says that you should do. Whatever God says you should do or says you should not do, that's what we're bound to keep. We cannot make laws where God does not make laws.
And what we have said is even more clear if another priest like Melchizedek appears, one who has become a priest not on the basis of a regulation as to his ancestry, but on the basis of the power of an indestructible life.
All right, so there's another, at least a third reference to Melchizedek having like no end of days or lasting forever and having an indestructible life. So I hate to, I guess, be found in contradiction with what seems to be the apparent message here, that Melchizedek maybe wasn't a normal person. So I'm open to thoughts and ideas, and I hope I have somebody out there that will give me some constructive feedback on what you think this means about Melchizedek not having end of days or having an indestructible life. Is it legacy, or is it something more than legacy?
For it is declared, you are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. The former regulation is set aside because it was weak and useless, for the law made nothing perfect.
All right, so now we have to address the status of the old law. This verse says the former regulation, that's the law of Moses, the Jewish law of Moses, the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, is set aside because it was weak and useless. Now, I think that's probably too harsh of a word to use there. I don't know what other translations say, but it was not useless because it did serve a purpose. It served the purpose of being a tutor to bring man to the point where Christianity, the fulfillment of the law would come, and the Messiah would come and make all things right. But that regulation, the former regulation of the Old Covenant law of Moses, has been set aside because it would not accomplish the goal. You cannot be saved by killing bulls and goats, because the law made nothing perfect. There was still sin in people's lives. That it was only rolled forward or forgotten or postponed, waiting for the time when things could be made perfect, where there could be grace and forgiveness of sins.
And a better hope is introduced by which we draw near to God. And it was not without an oath. Others became priests without any oath, but he became a priest with an oath when God said to him, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever. Because of this oath, Jesus has become the guarantor of a better covenant. Now, there have been many of those.
All right, so Jesus is the guarantor of a better covenant. The old covenant has been set aside, and Jesus brought in a better covenant. And the fact that it says guarantor, it's almost like talking about what is it, like collateral, where you don't receive the thing yet you have to put something up to prove that you're willing to pay the price in full later. So Jesus was the guarantor of a better covenant, something that was maybe not completely realized at the time of the writing of the book of Hebrews, but it is through Jesus that we could be rest assured that this better covenant would be fully realized. And it's highly likely that this interim period between 30 AD and 70 AD is this transition period where the old law was being done away with, and in 70 AD it was completely eliminated. And then from 70 AD on, there was no conflict. There should be no more conflict between Jewish and Christian systems, because the Jewish system was utterly wiped out, and the Christian system was confirmed by God.
Priests, since death prevented them from continuing in office, but because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them.
Now, I certainly understand Jesus living forever. He is the king now on the throne of his kingdom, and he will never die, and his kingdom will never end. It will never transfer power to anyone else. It will always be Jesus' kingdom forever and ever, and Jesus cannot die or cease to exist.
Such a high priest truly meets our need, one who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other high priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests men in all their weakness, but the oath which came after the law appointed the Son, who has been made perfect forever.
All right, so regular Jewish priests still sinned. You know, there's a people today that want to claim that we Christians should not ever sin. Now, should not is appropriate, but they would say, if you ever sin, then you're not a Christian. And I think that's wrong. I think we all live in a world where sin is inevitable, no matter how mature you are. Because the more mature you are, the more arrogant you become about your freedom from sin, the less dependent you are on Jesus and his mercy. And if you develop an attitude that you think you don't need Jesus and his mercy, then that would probably be the saddest condition of all. An arrogant, self-righteous attitude, thinking that you don't need forgiveness because you have become so mature and strong that you never sin. Now, under the old law, certainly things were different. There were many more laws to obey and keep, and it would be much easier to trip up and sin and break the law. But the high priests, you would think if anybody could have done it, the high priest could have done it. But they had to continually offer sacrifices day by day, first for his own sins. So every single day is offering sacrifices for his own sins before he could offer sacrifices for the sins of the people. So I hope I never develop the attitude where I'm so self-righteous that I think I don't sin and I don't need Jesus. I am a sinner in need of forgiveness and mercy from Jesus Christ, my Lord. And I think that's the attitude that even the most mature Christian should have. All right. There is chapter 7 of Hebrews. A lot of confusing, mystical things about Melchizedek.